Hi, it's Dr. Kate with the Form, Function, and Flow Lab podcast, and today I'm going to do a brief overview on the pelvic floor, what that is, how it can be dysfunctional in both men and women, because we both have pelvic floors, and it ties into what I'm working on right now, not in my in-person office, but I'm working on a course to address pelvic floor dysfunction, diastasis recti, and C-section rehabilitation. So very applicable to what I'm working on right now. And it is kind of my niche in my office. I do treat a lot of pre and postpartum women, but I also treat pelvic floor issues in men and people that have never had children as well. So your pelvic floor is that muscular bowl at the outlet of your pelvis that holds up your abdominal contents. So men do have one, and if they didn't, they would have all their abdominal contents spilling out. So it is definitely important in how our core functions, because ideally the pelvic floor is parallel to your diaphragm. So they're stacked when you're in like a good positioning for creating intra-abdominal pressure, and they should kind of talk to one another. So as you inhale and the diaphragm comes down, the pelvic floor accepts pressure and vice versa. So they should work in concert with one another. And some of the easy things to think of what would cause issue with your pelvic floor would be pushing a baby through one of the openings in your pelvic floor. And I think sometimes my postpartum moms have this misconception that they can only have pelvic floor issues if they've had a vaginal birth, which isn't true. You can have pelvic floor issues with a C-section as well, because with the weight of the baby for those 9 months, 9+ months, the baby, the amniotic fluid, the placenta, it's creating this pressure down on the pelvic floor. So just like a rubber band, muscles, as you push on them, they have to retract to hold against that force. So that would be like an eccentric contraction. So they're not getting much of a rest, of a break from all that pressure down onto them when you're creating a baby. So a lot of times what I give patients when they are pregnant are different poses to help shift baby off the pelvic floor and allow the pelvic floor that chance to fully relax. Because if you're working out any muscle, if you don't get a full stretch to the muscle, full relaxation, you aren't able to fully contract to the best of your ability. So having that constant eccentric tension on the pelvic floor makes it not able to fully contract, and then it can cause spasming and those kind of things. Now that's important to keep in mind, because a lot of time people jump into Kegels because it's something they've heard talked about for decades, and it's that squeezing of the pelvic musculature. And sometimes it's more so when people do it, it's like, what exactly are you squeezing? There's a lot of different layers of muscles down there. What is it that you're contracting when you're doing a Kegel? And typically, it can often be your sphincters that you're squeezing. So that would be the circular muscle around the anus and the circular muscle circling around the urethral and vaginal opening. So that would be like the muscle that when you're stopping the flow of urine or you're stopping defecation, it's not elevating the abdominal content. So that is different from the muscles that support your organs, support baby, not exactly the same thing. And a lot of times when we compensate for a spasming area or a weak area, we're going to squeeze other things. So you might be clenching your glutes or squeezing your inner thighs and trying to recruit muscles around that area to help that deficient spot. So if you're doing Kegels you might not be contracting what you need to be, and you might be squeezing something that's already too tight, and you're going to make it worse. So you might make your symptoms worse. So definitely I would never start someone off with Kegels. It is something that you have to earn the right to try to do, because typically we tend to be tight and we want to learn to fully relax first. And sometimes that strength just comes about naturally after learning to fully relax the pelvic floor. Some of the symptoms, if you're not sure if you have pelvic floor issues or not, some of the symptoms that occur with pelvic floor dysfunction are incontinence, urinary leakage, fecal leakage, fecal smearing, pain with sex, inability to use tampon or menstrual cup. It can even work its way out, and you can have, if you're having just this chronic hip pain that is not alleviating, or low back pain, it can actually, if you go down the rabbit hole, stem from some pelvic floor dysfunction. So that's typically when I start to check those kind of things when a guy comes into the office, and if we're not getting results, we'll check out the pelvic floor. And sometimes I don't even tell them, like, hey, we're working on your pelvic floor with these exercises. I just give them to them, tell them what to be feeling for, and they might not realize that that's what we're targeting. But yeah, the range of symptoms can be pretty vast. And then you also could have prolapses, and prolapses can happen in a variety of places. It could be prolapse of your bladder, it could be prolapse of your vagina, you can have rectal prolapse. So prolapse just means that the organ is coming down and it's not being supported well. And again, sometimes Kegels can make those prolapses worse. And then other things that you could do that you think is helping your core and all that, that could be making the prolapse or the urinary leakage worse or pain with sex worse, would be restricting your core. So sometimes patients will come in and they have used a very tight abdominal binder or something like that. And that's not usually going to be the cause of a prolapse or anything, but it's going to make it worse because it's altering how we're able to regulate our intra-abdominal pressure. And it's not allowing for that full expansion of the rib cage, and that if you're having nowhere for the pressure to go around the waist, it's got to go somewhere. So it's going to go up or down, and then it's going to make that pressure when you exert yourself more forceful down where the prolapse is. So that you think you're supporting your core and doing something good for yourself, and it's going to possibly make it worse. So just some things to think about when you're in that postpartum journey and trying to navigate all the different symptoms that can come along with that. And there's a whole host of things, and that's kind of what we get into in the course that I'm working on, the different ways to relax the pelvic floor. And when we get stressed, even that can tighten our pelvic floor. So we tend to carry stress up in our shoulders, so we draw our shoulders up towards our ears. That's one place people carry tension, but another place is that we tuck our tailbone under, we clench our glutes, and we're just like rigid. And when you tuck your tailbone under, so that would be that end point of your tailbone or your sacrum, that's your coccyx. And if you think of that scooping under, and then the bones you sit on closing in together, that is going to shorten that pelvic bowl, that pelvic floor area, and it can lead it to be short and tight, which makes it not function as well. So stress, I find that stress can exacerbate existing issues or create new issues. So that's another thing to think about, is where am I carrying my stress? Am I clenching my glutes? Am I sitting at a desk all day or driving a lot? And sometimes when we do that, we tend to round a little bit in the upper back, which creates its own kind of problems. But then we're tucking the tailbone under, which again makes that pelvic floor narrow and shorten, causing maybe some problems down the road. So there's all these different changes that you can make throughout your day too, that is going to help you from leaving your pelvic floor in that shortened state, which can give you those issues. So we have the trauma from birth. We have our postural stuff throughout the day. We have stress that can be a problem. Another thing with guys that come into the office that might have an issue is if they're cyclists, or, you know, if a woman patient comes in and maybe they're really into their Peloton and they're always riding, which is great. Exercise is fantastic. But if you know that you do something that is going to make you prone to having constant pressure up on your pelvic floor, you know, a Peloton seat is very narrow and not forgiving. All that constant pressure on your pelvic floor, we're going to want to do some stuff after you have a ride to relax it, to try to open it up a little bit post-ride so that you don't have problems down the road. So those are things that I see in the office, and you know, you want people to be able to do the things they love long term. And if it means making a 5-minute little stretch routine after your rides, then that's way better than having to rehab a problem that occurs after a few months of riding. Because then you might have to take a break and all of that kind of thing. And another thing when I work with people with pelvic floor issues is that I don't want them to get discouraged with their progress or anything like that. Consistency is truly the key in making sustained long-term change when you're rehabbing that kind of an area. So, you know, for the pregnant patient, you know, it took you 9 months of buildup to create an issue. And then maybe you had some tearing that we need to address with the scar tissue actually within that area, waiting for it to heal, then addressing the scars, then slowly starting to reconnect with the musculature down there and work on your breathing. All of those things take time, but also that consistency is going to be what helps to create, you know, good patterns and muscle memory. Because just like your biceps or your quads or wherever, you need that consistency to create muscle memory in your pelvic floor too, because it works similarly. And it seems like not important to maybe have the consistency, but 1 time a week of addressing those issues is not going to be as helpful as 5 minutes every day or 10 minutes every day versus an hour of working on it once a week. That spread out consistency is going to be way more beneficial for the mind-body connection than being a weekend warrior and doing all your exercises 3 times in one day. So spacing it out and being gracious with your body too. So starting slow, simply working on the breathing, which doesn't feel like you're working on that area, but it definitely, diaphragm and pelvic floor symmetry and connection is one of the key things that we do, and that we do it through the course. But yeah, so there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. And it doesn't really matter how long you've had the symptoms. I mean, it makes it maybe a little longer of a process, but it's never too late to start addressing those symptoms. And you definitely don't have to live with urinary incontinence forever. It's just, are you at the point where it's making your life not as pleasant that you're willing to take the time to, dedicate 6 months of daily routine to fix it? And how important is it to you to get back to that place where you can do the things that you want to do, but realizing that you don't have to just bear it. And I feel like I've talked about this for years and started doing pelvic floor coursework and continuing ed 4 or 5 years ago. And I feel like I talk about it all the time, but it's always surprising to me when I'll run into someone or something that hasn't really heard that much about it, or they'll say, "Oh, I've been doing my Kegels," and but it's not getting any better. I think it's going to take so much exposure from all different professionals and people to let women know that you don't have to just settle for not being able to go on the trampoline with your kids or run a 5K with them. You don't have to settle, and I think it needs to be put out there over and over and over again so that women can realize that it's not normal, and they can then have the confidence to reach out and find someone, a provider, a course, whatever, to address those issues and make the time for themselves. Because I think sometimes as, especially with moms, you put your kids first, you're doing everything for your family, and you don't maybe value your own health and quality of life in that way because you're so busy and focused on everyone around you. But you are important too, and it's important to take that time for yourself and feel like an individual and whole, and makes you a better, you see that all the time in social media, that it makes you a better wife, mother, friend, daughter, whatever. But sometimes I think it takes a turning point of like, you've just had enough and now you're ready to address it. So just putting it out there, these resources are there for you, but you come to it in your own time when you're ready, when you feel like you can squeak out that 30 minutes a day, to whether it be when your kids are sleeping or when they're at school, that you can try to do something good for yourself. And if you guys have any questions about if you're not sure if your symptom might be pelvic floor related, you can drop a comment or email me, and I'd be happy to let you know if I think that it's something that is pelvic floor related. Or, I have a pretty nice network of other colleagues that work with pelvic floor health all over. So if you're in a different state or area, I can usually find someone within that network that could maybe help you in person if it seems like you have something that needs more care. So I hope everyone has a great day.